Hey guys, most of you know me. I'm Ben Hodson. We're just going to be looking at design thinking in the context of how we can use it to better improve our businesses, projects, creative ideas across all sorts of contexts and industries. Some of the contexts that we'll talk about later will be relevant to us and our clients, but ultimately these principles can be applied everywhere. So to start with, what is design thinking? I think one of the most important things to realize is there's not a single definition. It's a particular buzzword within the business world at the moment. It's been a mainstay of what designers have looked at for a long time, what was based in what you would call human design or human-centered design. And there are a whole bunch of ways of thinking about it, talking about it. The way that I'm presenting to you today is the way that resonates most with me, and I think is the best sort of catch-all. But it's really more than just something for designers. It's a concept, and it's a way of seeing the world that means you don't have to be a designer, which is really cool because we're a bit nerdy and into things like line height and kerning of type. I think designers are awesome. The reason why we wanted to share about this today is almost all the work we do within our own business, our own context, and almost any other business or brand or individual or charity we work with is most things in this world could be improved. And this way of thinking, this way of approach is a really great way, not the only way in life, but a really great way in how we tackle those problems, iterate and improve. So if you look up design thinking, there's some resources and references I'm happy to share with you guys. You'll get produced and you will see things like this. It's important that this graphic is not clear, so don't worry that you can't see it and can't read it. And the reason I don't want you to actually understand or get this is because you will find a dozen different versions of this. There's academic ones that are well researched and well resourced. There are very simplistic ones that resonate better with me. But what I want to summarize it as and why it's important is actually if we approach the world like a designer approaches a design problem, it can really help us transform the way that we approach everything, really, everything we do, and especially things like our products and services, but even the way that we organize our business and approach our businesses. And therefore, for me, the way that I would like to communicate design thinking to you guys today is basically this balance between what is great from the point of view of people. So that could be clients, it could be people within an organization, internal, external, but in general humans. There's maybe an argument for a school of thought of design thinking for dogs. I'm not an expert on this, but basically how we take a perspective of a person and then balancing it with other attributes. So in the case of business and projects, it will be maybe what is we literally can do and build with technology, and in terms of business, it might be what we can economically, what we can afford. The visuals that I prefer and the ways that I prefer to communicate how we use design thinking is firstly understanding why and where and sort of how we bring it in, and simply put is going how, when we come to this problem, how can we balance what is really what we want, what is feasible and viable as well, and within that space using a process to help us get to something a little bit more of a solution. Simply put, it helps those of us that aren't trained as designers or less formal training as designers to use some frameworks, ways of thinking, tools, so that we can overcome problems, we can address challenges. Most diagrams that try and explain how design thinking process works has these sort of elements to it. Don't worry too much, and I'm not going to go through all of this exactly. The main things you need to know is it's not really a linear 1 to 5 process. It's much more like a initial starting point. So empathize and I think I've got a typo there, but actually understand the people point of view. Then when you go in and start to create ideas, it's this iterative process of where you come back round again and again. The key tenets of it are, as quickly as possible, you want to create a basic workable idea. So when we talk about prototypes within design or business, we talk about things like MVP, minimum viable product. And what that is a prototype. So it might be a prototype of an idea. It might be literally a cardboard cutout of a product. It might be some design flats. So this concept we're working on for Christmas, like this is sort of a rough visual prototype before we actually go into production. One of the core tenets of design thinking is don't wait until the end to start actually building and testing. As quickly as possible, create a very, very rough idea, visual, paper version, drawn version, maybe use Post-its to basically test your idea. And then as you test it, you will tend to, get better ideas. You will tend to be able to define it better. And then you tend to come around again. So you just keep going around this process. One of the other graphics and the ways that I like to think of problem solving through design thinking is as many possible outcomes as possible in the first instances. So you don't just look at a particular problem and stay there. You then look at the problems behind that problem. And for instance, when we're trying to think of a campaign idea for what someone's trying to achieve, or we're doing this Christmas thing, rather than just go, okay, there's one idea, we go, well, why don't we do it like this? Or why don't we try a digital strategy? Or why don't we try and build a Santa's grotto? Or why don't we and keep going wider and wider in terms of how we potentially could go. And then if you follow a good process within design thinking, you tend to be able to then focus down to a solution. And if, for instance, you end up at a solution that was very similar to your first idea, that's not unusual. Fantastic, that's not a problem. But very rarely is it wise to just have one idea, stick with the idea, output the idea. It's worth pursuing. So for me, the diagram that best illustrates what we should be looking at is more like this. So rather than this complex thing with sort of 20 levels of complexity and direction, etc., it's basically this sort of, I don't want to say cylindrical because it's not, but this repetitive process of looking for inspiration, looking for ideas, developing those ideas further, and actually getting on with it. And so, for instance, a prototype, you might improve, do a second version, a third version, and a physical product's a really, really helpful, useful way of thinking about it. But also it works in digital. It also works just in terms of concepts. It works in terms of campaign ideas. So if there was a way to communicate design thinking that was in its simplest form, I would suggest this is it. But there's lots of other things. One of my favorite ways of thinking about problem solving through design thinking is the process and the journey you go through. Very rarely do you have a perfect solution just come to you, and you tend to go on a bit of a journey. But at the point at which you follow that process, you start to develop a bit of an idea, you test that idea. Scientists would call it a hypothesis, and you test the theory, and you start to prove or disprove it. That moment of insight is where you start to head back to a place of actually having a bit of confidence in your idea. And in theory, design thinking means that you almost inevitably come to some kind of solution. may not be ideal, it may not be perfect, but it's a process that leads us to at least some kind of outcomes. Very practically, one of the keys to bringing design thinking and making it available to everyone that we work with and every sort of business is, don't just employ business strategists to think about your business strategy or designers to think about your design problems. And so very practically, when we think of a really great brainstorming time or sort of, you can interject any other business sort of buzzword here, blue sky thinking or creative concept development time. When you do that, if you only bring the same type of people with the same worldviews, the same ethnicity and age and all the sort of, if everything is very similar, you end up coming to very similar ideas. So the more types of people, and there is a really great point around diversity in this, but also just people from different departments. You might be trying to think of a really great marketing strategy, but why not bring in the people from the finance department and bring in that? Well, there's probably a good reason for that. But bring in as many people as possible to bring in different perspectives. And certainly initially, when you're trying to think of as many possible solutions as possible, sometimes too many cooks can make the second part, where you're trying to focus in on the solution, a bit tougher. But it's still a great idea to involve people. There's other terms that are related to design thinking. There's a wonderful new field called Lean UX. I'm a bit of a fan of this, and this is basically a new area of thought and academic research and thinking. And it basically, it brings in design thinking, this iterative process of improving and problem solving, agile software development. So when we talk about as a team doing a sprint, that comes from terminology in this world, but basically it's this MVP way of working where you create a small problem that you attack within a set space of time with defined roles, defined objectives, and then you iteratively publish, test, and improve again. And then there is an area of business idea, certainly within the startup world, called Lean, most famously made by Toyota, which is the process. Lean is the process of removing waste and removing unnecessary, processes, steps, and trying to refine down to the core of what makes sense. So Lean Startup is a wonderful area that is not dissimilar to design thinking, but very specifically, it's where you might combine those thinkings from design thinking within the context of a new business idea or a new project idea. Basically, in Lean UX, and UX is a term which means user design or user-centered design. It comes from user experience design, which comes from human-centered design. I think I used to call myself a human-centered designer. Nowadays, I think I'm a UX designer. But essentially, it basically is bringing all those ideas where you think like a designer, you attack problems, you try and keep coming back to, you get obsessed with the problem, you don't just get obsessed with the solutions. And Lean UX is a process of a bit of a development on from design thinking. You, in a similar way, you create some assumptions where you start from. Those of us amongst us a bit more academic, I think we'd see this. I know some of us have some dissertations to write this year. You will probably be given a very similar formula for how you start to create your academic writing. But essentially, identify some of your initial assumptions that you're working on, try and create a very specific idea or theory. And the way that makes sense within a business or creative or marketing output is really specifically define your outcomes, what you want to achieve, personas. And we have a very clearly defined term for personas within marketing, but it's almost wider than that. It's basically going, who are we trying to solve this problem for? and really defining who those people are, what they are looking for, what their needs are, what their problems are, and then what features we'd like to see in the problem we're solving. And then we move to the point of actually creating things, so actually developing the features, building the products and services. So design thinking feeds into this. It's not just design thinking, there's a lot of other parts of it. I'm a big fan of approaching both business and design with these methodologies. Before I get to some specific examples, though, there is one challenge to this school of thought. And the challenge is this: if you only produce a basic version of an idea, an MVP, and you test and test and test and test using a lean idea of let's not waste time, let's use the most basic possible versions and let's iterate until it's good, you end up potentially only creating a, maybe not lackluster, but you create a solution, you almost undoubtedly find a solution, but it may not be true innovation. And all I mean by innovation is bringing something new into the world and challenging the status quo. So as an example, you might end up with one of the main car manufacturers. I know the Chevrolet Bolt is the best example, where they took a current car and they put a electric engine in it and a battery, and they said, buy a new car. And although people are buying that car because they may be loyal to the brands, you contrast that with a brand like Tesla, who has tried to reimagine what it would be to have an electric vehicle. And they've created something, at least in their first few models, something that was quite revolutionary, a very different approach, something very desirable. And if Tesla had purely just gone with an iterative approach, they may have ended up not just buying a few components from other car manufacturers, they might have ended up with something just not very desirable. So there is a challenge to the school of thought within design thinking and lean UX and even lean business strategy, which is there is another school of thought that if we do not allow ourselves to build a culture that is vision-led, we potentially miss the even better idea. So this is not a complete rejection of a beautiful iterative design process, but there is also the school of thought that we need to make sure that it's not the only process. There needs to be ways that we approach the world, think about what we're doing, and sometimes try an absolutely mad idea that is hard to prove, hard to test, hard to prototype. But Tesla is an example again, no doubt, after they set down a real clear vision of how they wanted to create cars that demonstrate to the world how good their battery tech was, no doubt they went through lots and lots of iterative design processes to help them create a great product in the end. And they absolutely built on patents that were already out there, certain battery tech that was already out there, axles, and I think they had some engine components from other car manufacturers. So it's not that as a case study they completely rejected design thinking as a school of thought, but we just want to make sure that if the only thing we do is think as designers, we sometimes may miss a bigger, more exciting strategy and idea. I, in my own life, really like design thinking. I certainly haven't rejected it, and I have almost never created something completely original. I've nearly always iteratively approached and defined and created things based on things that I can see established, often wanting to do a better job than what I see other people do. But actually, it's very rarely would I argue I've ever come up with anything radically new or creative from a completely original point of view. But like any great creative process, whether you think of great artists, great composers, they very rarely reject everything that has come before. They learn from what's come before and they build on it. So for an example, we have created a brand through the winter business called Snow Holiday. This brand sells holidays off the back of the transport company. And 3 times now we have pivoted it to a new concept, and it looks like next year we will be doing it again. So the original idea didn't really work, but the idea of keeping it low cost, keeping it nimble, and attacking the problem, which was a lot of the people that Snowcab drove its customers to wanted a combined booking. They didn't want to deal with 4 or 5 people. They liked the idea of just dealing with one set of people, and they liked the service, and they would rather book everything through us rather than lots of different people. The way that's now working out is proving very different to how I first imagined it, but it is being able to be developed because we've kept it quite low. We've tested it in the market. We've tried to push it out there, and we've not hired lots of staff and spent lots on marketing. And as a business example, it's something we can keep, fairly light in terms of the overheads, and make it very easy to pivot and change. So in my life, almost every day I employ a similar sort of idea, whether it be a small piece of design or a new product or service within a business. Do any of you guys on the call have any examples or any questions or anything you'd like to add?
Quite academic, isn't it? Like, you always think of, well, I guess there's a perception of the creative process being like sitting in a coffee shop and having a coffee and waiting for inspiration to come from like something that comes around you. But really, what you're saying is that it's actually like an incredibly active process of thinking about the problem at hand, and actually going through quite well. It's interesting because there's like rigid but also flexible steps. So I don't quite know how like I'm marrying that one up. It sounds like you can move on to the next step, and then something else happens, and then you have to go back and like and rethink and so on and iterate.
Let me give you some great examples. So let's take let's take Joe writing a wonderful bit of content. You might sketch a couple of loose ideas, you might write a bunch of copy, you might come back, write a whole bunch of things, then you go for a walk, or someone messages you, or you chat to someone, and suddenly another whole idea jumps in, and you go back and you hack it apart, you delete a whole bunch. And that in a way is a very similar process. Another one might be, let's say, Josh with, I'm going to use video for the moment, Josh, rather than code, but you might plan a film, you might do a load of pre-production, and then when on the day you're shooting, you go, this isn't working, we need to do it more like this. You remake the film, and then you get in the editing suite. And then when you've looked at the footage you've got, you go, the idea I had in the day isn't really working, and then you almost rebuild it again. That is not exactly the same as design thinking, but it, in a way, in so many ways. And of course, Kat, when she has like a great design challenge, it is possibly the clearest example. But I think we all do it intuitively in part. What design thinking does is it gives permission to people beyond designers to build in just a workflow methodology. And just to your point, Stephen, I absolutely would say that first bit where you're trying to find empathy and trying to understand the human perspective, I think you probably need to observe people. So a really good way of doing that is probably sitting in a coffee shop with a notebook, jokes aside, or maybe that's not the place. But the point is if you can actually start to get that little bit of insight, it can kick the process off so much better. So it's why that image of the flaneur sitting there in the coffee shop developing an idea is still valid. But what can't happen is that's where it stops, because that is just the kickoff that gets us into. And there's a great design thinking process called the design studio, where you actively bring in product manager. This is from the world of software design, but you bring in the product managers, the developers, the designers, but also maybe a business development person. And you design and you develop the functionality of the app together, rather than just the designer and the developer. You start to bring in this much more, and it gives permission for us going, well, actually, we're going to use this process because very quickly we can develop some ideas. But it is great. So I think you're a designer now, Stephen. You have permission.
Well, I think my problem is that I just it sounds like what you're saying is that I perhaps almost should be more vocal when I'm asked for it, because I know a classic thing that Ben and I have is Ben's doing a bit of design and he asks me my opinion on something. I always just say to Ben, I don't have an opinion. I like your opinion will be my opinion. But it actually sounds like what you're saying is actually it helps to have alternate views from people outside of the design process.
Yeah, and me
I'd
and
agree with that.
me and Kat just went through Strength Finders together, and we both reflected on our ability to help find a good idea and make it better. But weirdly enough, as the two designers on this call right now, we're not necessarily always best placed to come up with the best idea, just in terms of who we are as individuals. Obviously, that's different for other designers. And just knowing the rest of you, you're nearly all brilliant at the sort of ideation and phase in different ways. And where our job may come in, may be going, actually, yes, Stephen, be more vocal. We might make it a lot better and change it and refine it and ultimately even reject it. No, we're not doing that. But I think part of that sort of initial phase of feeding the hopper of ideas, I think it is brilliant. The more perspectives you get, and the more people you ask, and people outside of the industry and people outside of the business, and it's why usability testing within the context of, you know, design and websites and technology is really helpful, because you can test it against people who aren't yet clients of the project you're working on, etc. Yeah.
I really liked this, Ben. Thank you so much for doing this. I've been very aware of like the lean startup process, which is obviously like try to nick all the rigorous studies around design thinking and then pass it off as a new thing to make loads of money, which they did very successfully. Design and iterate on design thinking and remarket. But I love the process. I actually sometimes have a slight struggle with lean and design process about when things end up in the wrong order, and that's one of my issues, and that's my issue, not design thinking's issue. Is that often like you go through this cycle, and I love the diverge bit. I love like the creating of choices, and I thought it was really nice. I've not seen it in that diagram before, like the diverge converge. I love that. Like I love that whole process of creating choices, and I love that when we do have as diverse as possible, because I do think you create better choices. And then I really love it when we make the choices. My frustration is like when we're in the middle of creating that MVP or that particular prototype, that like you're having like what I would call an implementation meeting, and then like someone's like trying to drag us back to the diverge point, and like I sometimes get that kind of like frustration, because I'm just like, no, we've made our choices. Let's just get this iteration out of the door. And then someone else is just like, but I have a better idea. And I'm like, it might be a better idea. I just want to finish the one that we started. Do you have any advice for that type of process?
The only thing, and I'm not very good at this because I think the impression you're doing is often my voice in our relationship, but the go as wide as possible as early as possible. So that divergent bit. So let's not use a design like a website as an example. Let's use we're trying to solve society's problems. So let's take I don't know, a really big one, something like homelessness in the UK, and go, okay, well we're trying to attack this problem of people sleeping rough. And you go, okay, well we just need to make sure that there's enough affordable hostels and enough money in the government to be able to pay. And then you take a step back and go, well, is that really a fundamental problem? I don't actually know this well enough, this subject, but let's say you go, actually, it's not that. It's making sure there is a welfare system that catches people before they get to that point. And then you go, well, it's actually not that. It's the breakdown of, you know, certain values in society and how we care for each other. It's not actually that. It's to do with how we prioritize different types of people in our societies. You know, okay, I'm not an expert on that issue, but the point is you could start with a problem, which is I just need houses for people who don't have them. And the more deeper you push the problem and get obsessed with the problem, and the wider you start going in terms of, well, actually, is it this problem? Is it this problem? Is it this problem? the wider you go quicker, very quickly, when you then start to converge, you will have centered on the things that matter most. So this is obviously a huge societal issue that's hard to tackle, but you know, in a smaller business setting, you will quickly get a sense of the things that keep resonating, you know, and maybe you do an exercise where everyone in the team writes down one level of problems, and then you write down another level of what we think the root of that problem is and what we think the root of that problem is, and then we grab the things that matter to us and we put them in the let's look at this pile, and suddenly we've gone from all these and quickly we've focused in. And then I would argue at that point it probably is the job of less people to help them refine. The problem is using the idea of problem solving is the companies that only then refine and get obsessed with a solution are the ones that 5 years later are out of date. You know, so I don't know if we can use a good big example. Let's just go back to Tesla. If Tesla loses its way and just thinks it's a car manufacturer, it will be so indistinct from all the others in 10 years. If it remembers that it's trying to get the whole world onto EV and it's trying to demonstrate that it wants to become the world's biggest battery, it will find other ways to demonstrate that are also revolutionary. And I'm not speaking for Tesla. I don't know if that is still the case. But the point is, I think you're right, because it feels painful if you then keep coming back to the problem stage. But I think this is the core tenet of design thinking. As quickly as possible, you need to get to an output. You have to. So we don't always have the luxury in a business context to spend the time to do this multiple times. We just don't. And that's where that sort of business, commercial, realistic, viable, that all those bits kind of come in. But what I would like us to do, and what it would be great to see our clients do in their own businesses, is to go as quickly as possible to a solution, test it in the market. So it's not just a paper thing. We start actually pushing stuff out there and then quickly pivot, retest, and then come back through that process, rather than it all being in a theoretical space and in the drawing board stage. You know, we're doing part of the design process, great, but we're not doing design thinking if all we're doing is keep going round and round on the prototype, the very MVP bit. We've got to get it into the market, and we've got to actually build features. We've got to actually design the website. We've got to actually get people using it. And so often we don't actually know if our suggestion, our hypothesis for a good user journey on their new marketing website is good until we see people actually use it. And that's why I believe we build really beautiful sites that are very flexible, is because we can then go back round and we can improve. Sorry, preach over, but I do agree with you that we should get better at actually getting to the point of creating and delivering. But let's not then think our job is done.
No, I would agree with that. I'd agree with that.
As part of what you kind of laid out, the kind of multiple voices, multiple iterations, do you have any specific strategies and kind of elements you personally look to build in to avoid building camels, you know, horses designed by committees, like that? Because that seems to me kind of like one of the weaker sort of legs that you could actually eventually end up on.
Yeah.
My thought about that is that, and that's why I really love it, and I've saved that image, like the diverge and then converge. I think like getting outside interests, like getting all of those thoughts in that diverge process is like what then kind of like really sparks items. And I happen to live next door to a couple who bring in lots of diverse thoughts, and so I often have conversations with them. But then it's our expertise, right, that then begins to help converge. So you're not designing by committee, but you're trying to get in all these other points of view, which then shape the decisions we make. Is that right, Ben?
No, that's perfect. And that's actually a better way of saying what I said earlier about the diverge and converge. That is where more insight and expertise comes in, is that refinement then process of what you come to. So you're not actually designing by committee, you are exploring problems by committee. And the really hard bit is trying to keep people focused on the problem, not the solution, because naturally we go, oh, we could do this to do this and do this to do that, and that's fine. But that's where you start to creep into that committee element, because you're all then feeding in. So one of the ways you can help do it is just try and imagine that side of it and going, actually, yeah, that's brilliant. But is that really addressing what we're trying to do here? And getting them to go, oh, okay, you're right. I had thought that would be a great solution, but you're right. Maybe we're actually talking about this. And that thought is probably more valuable from someone who has no experience and expertise in this area than the solution idea, because they don't necessarily have the experience. But at the same time, sometimes outsiders come up with definitely the best, just random thoughts that prompt you to do something brilliant. But it's not simple, is it? And it depends what it is. If it's like we're just doing this little fun thing for us and it doesn't really matter having lots of people involved in stuff. But if it's a really important, I don't know, component for a machine in a hospital, so, in the end, the engineer has to rationalize that within material choices and, the functionality, so I think it's easier in certain aspects to see how that refinement comes. And me and Kat were talking, was it even yesterday, Kat, about what you guys will bring to and we were talking about Stephen with some of that strategy element where Stephen is often brilliant of going, yeah, but why are we doing this? And yeah, but why are we even, and it's very easy in the designer way of thinking to get very quickly focused into the problems and the solving of those problems. And it sometimes takes that extent of going, should we be doing this at all? Should we be sitting on seats? Let's never sit on seats again. And that's not an impression of you, Stephen, by the way. But I think, more perspective in the beginning, more expertise in the end. I'm sure there's probably a graph that, because you still want other perspectives as you go.
Have you heard of the double diamond model as well? Where basically it's what you're talking about, converging, but then you also diverge and converge again to diverge at the end to, it's basically showing the iterative process as well, but
yes,
but doing a bit,
actually, yeah,
a bit what you were saying, Jeff, that it's good to converge a little bit after you've diverged, just to open up, actually, have we come to any new ideas halfway through? Maybe they should be incorporated in the
that's helpful, yeah.
Thing.
I have come across this. The reason that I didn't include this is I think one of the problems then is you can end up with thinking it's just a two-step process.
Yeah.
And you lose some of the joy of what it actually can be. And when we have a big enough budget and a big enough project, it can actually be several ways around. And I think anybody who would perpetuate this would agree that you should then come back to the beginning. But yeah, absolutely. Initial ideas, define it, come back to really defining what the problem is, and then go and sort of define the solution. That's great. Nothing wrong with that. Cool. Any thoughts, questions, any other examples of where it either works well, or maybe a thought about where it maybe doesn't always work, or any downright I disagree with it as a process?
No, it's really cool to hear, Ben. I'd love to read some more about it as well. Yeah, I think as you've from what you said, yeah, I feel like I can see it in a lot of like different kind of things I've done, either creative or like academic, like the essay writing process, and how like that's often for me felt like, I don't know, I could never really work in a straightforward way, and I would start in sort of all over the shop with like, I write the conclusion, and then I'm like, I just have a moment of inspiration where I write like this little paragraph, and I'm like, I don't know quite where this goes, but it goes somewhere, and you kind of slowly build it. And it's not, you kind of have to balance it with like more logical thinking, which I think I've got like also better at over the years, is actually being able to like be more, apply a bit more structure to that process, so that you're not just like going all over the shop, because that can actually be quite a difficult way to work. But yeah, that idea of just putting something to paper and just seeing what happens with it, and then coming back to it. And then I see it also in like, I don't know, different creative things that I've done in my own time. Like I did a bit of songwriting in lockdown, and just that kind of, I've not like produced anything like massive, but just like that process of you start with a little idea and then you just kind of follow a thread, and then you just try and build on it and build on it, and maybe you leave it for a while and then you come back and then suddenly you see it in a different way. Or like doing stuff with the theatre where you can spend months like with a scene, or like like that musical number that I did in the show I just did, and just the way you can always improve it, like, and even like within the show week you're kind of adding things to it and think, actually now we see this, it's on the stage and we're all in these positions, actually what if I was standing over here at this point, like what if I had can I have a cane, can I twirl a cane, and it's not, just sort of adding things that are sort of like you build on it, and it's not a straightforward thing of you start with a plan, you follow the plan, you just do it. Like, all the rehearsal is partly trying to learn it and partly just seeing how it feels and knowing that you can always kind of do a better version, and then tomorrow you could probably do an even better, like just that kind of creative discovery process. And I think it's easy to get lost at the early stage when you're thinking about all the things you could do, like the divergent process like stage, I guess, thinking like, what creative things should I do today, like, well, it could be anything, how do I possibly know what to do, like, and actually you just have to start with an idea and then build on that just for the sake of it, pretty much, like, and know that you won't be able to like cover everything, but actually that you won't be able to do anything until you've got like something tangible to kind of build on. And
the reason I keep bringing back to things like business isn't just because of my own interests and things I do. It's also the old school of thought was you wrote a very comprehensive business plan, you went to a bank, you got a loan, you start your business idea. Not only do banks not give you money when you need it and then offer it to you when you don't need it, not only is that an issue, the reality is one of the most defining aspects of business success is timing, and timing is such a unquantifiable, you might have the best team in the world, the best finance, the best idea, but if it's not the right fit in the market at the time, it will fail. And equally, people who've had very little money, not the expertise, have done incredibly well because it just seemed lucky. And so you can't quite quantify it, but therefore one of the reasons why you should get a basic model out into the market is you can start testing and figuring out if the timing is good. But anyway, guys, I need to shoot, but hopefully that was useful. I will share a PDF if you want and download the video.
Yes, please, to the PDF. That's good.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Ben.
Ben.